Great, thank you for that. So Beth, I'm going to ask you a question or two, then we'll throw it open to the audience. You know, I just wanted to start, first of all, congratulations on the film. Gets me every time. And what I'm curious about is, you know, sort of your entry point into your own family story. So, you know, obviously your mom is a central figure in the family. She's the youngest. She has kind of a unique story in a way among the seven. How much did you and your mom talk growing up about her experiences, and what was that like for you?
Sure. Well, thank you again for having us, and thank you to all the volunteers that are here working the festival. They've been amazing all week. And I promised to answer the question, but I want to acknowledge two other people here in the audience. My husband is the executive producer, Joel Booty, who's right over here. And I feel very blessed that we have our editor, Aaron Soffin, with us here, so please give up for Aaron. And Aaron, I have a feeling we're going to get you down here pretty soon. But to answer your question, I was 6 years old when I learned that my mom was adopted, which is the same age that she was when she came to this country. And when I learned that, I didn't really understand what adoption was, but then she kind of explained it, and I said, well, you know, why? Didn't your mom want you? And of course, I later learned, I remember the moment learning she was adopted, but I don't know exactly when I learned that she was a Holocaust survivor and what that meant. That happened more like around third grade, so maybe 8 years old, 9 years old. But she had so few memories. She was in hiding when she was about 3 and 4 years old, 5 years old, and came to this country when she was 6. So a lot of the memories that she has are more stories that have been told to her. The two specific ones that she does remember are the scene that we've animated. We call it Lena Arrested, and that's where she's in the kitchen and her mom puts her in the closet. And then the other kind of visceral one that she has that was not told to her, but she experiences in her body when she relives it, is standing between her dad's legs when the Red Army was coming down the street. So I would ask her more questions, and she would not have any answers. And sometimes she would get irritated with me. I've told you already. I don't remember. And other times it was just, I never felt like I was poking or needling a painful memory because it was so long ago. She had displaced so much of it. But I think what kept me so curious about all of it is when I learned she was adopted, I also learned at that time that she had 5 other sisters and a brother. And I was like, well, when do I get to meet them? And she said, you will never, ever, ever, ever meet them. And I think when you're 6 and you're told no, you want it more than if you were told yes. So that just stayed with me. And I would even imagine, I remember going to Israel with a youth group trip with my temple. I don't know, when I was about 15. And I saw this woman in the Tel Aviv airport, and she was barefoot, and she had my mom's feet. And so I would just kind of fantasize, like, I wonder if that's my mom's sister. You know, I'm an actor by trade. And so my job is to kind of crawl inside the shoes of other people. And to get really specific with your question, Ken, it's like, even in my acting work, I would often fantasize about what she might have gone through to help me get to a certain place in a character that I was playing. And I never really understood why. Why would I go to that place when she didn't share much? I didn't even really know I met my aunts and uncles, you know, post 1986, but it just, I think, is in your bones in a way that I couldn't let it go. Now, they say that there's always one person in the family, I have an older brother and a younger sister, who's kind of the memory keeper of the family. And I don't think I understood that was my role, but I do now. That's definitely been the role that I've taken on for my family.
And fast forwarding, when did you decide that you wanted to really be the chronicler of your family and make this film?
Well, so I was supposed to go back to Germany with my Uncle Alphonse. We had decided that we were going to go, just the two of us, so I could see it through his eyes. He had been doing a lot of research. I wasn't even aware that he and my mom had begun to make the application at Yad Vashem to honor Paul and Arthur Schmidt as Righteous Among the Nations. But I was aware that I had filled out paperwork on my mom's behalf to have her mother's name at Yad Vashem in the books. And anyway, we went back to, my uncle and I were supposed to go, and he died. So I was heartbroken to have lost my uncle. I was heartbroken to have lost the opportunity to see Germany through his eyes. And my mother picked up the mantle. We were all heartbroken that we lost this patriarch of the family, and she said, well, let's go back to Germany, and let's go to the town that hit us, and meet with the town historians who were so helpful to him. And I thought, okay, fine. I didn't expect much of it, because it was just such a different kind of trip than what I had in my mind. And the historians, you meet Marlis in the film, but her husband, Herbert, who really did so much of the research, had died by the time we started filming. But they had a surprise for us, and they invited the grandson of Arthur Schmidt to come meet us. And this was a man who was 2 years older than I, my brother's age. And meeting him was this watershed moment where all of a sudden I realized that if the story didn't get told, it would be gone forever. I never felt it was my story to tell. I felt it was my mom's or her siblings. But at that moment, I just said, right. Everything, all bets are off. It's going to happen. And I did. I fortunately was in school. I went back to get my master's midlife, and I was at UCLA in between my second and third years of graduate school. And I came running back to campus, and I started pounding on all the documentary professors' doors saying, look, I know I'm a theater kid, but you got to let me into your film classes. And they did. And I really, really credit UCLA for getting me to my first principal shoot, which was at Yad Vashem, where I don't get to, yell rolling or cut or anything. Like, you're on the Yad Vashem train. You do, it's a ceremony that they've done 27,000 times, and I had to just show up in spades. So we caught what we caught, and then it was really kind of proof of concept for a while. Went through a couple of different editors, and then I was blessed to meet Aaron Soffin, who's right there. So I think you should come join us.
Yeah, come on up,
Yeah,
Aaron.
come on.
And while Aaron's coming up, let's open it up to you guys for some questions. Right here.
Does your mother ever regret that she didn't reach out again to try to see her father? I mean, I know she said that she was fine, but
The question, do you want to repeat it?
Sure. The question is, did my mother ever regret not reaching out to her father while he was still alive? Even though they say that there was no contact, there actually was a tiny bit of minimal contact. And by that, I mean, her sisters always knew where my mom was on the south side of Chicago. So sometimes she would just kind of feel like people were trailing her. And they were. They would see, my grandparents got my mom a little green Triumph sports car when she turned 16. And they'd see my mom zipping around town and stuff like that. There was, when my mom was engaged to my father, this is 1960, when women had to go to the doctor to get a syphilis test. Men didn't have to, but women had to. And so she's in the doctor's office getting her syphilis test. And these two women came up to her and said, do you mind if we talk to you in the hallway? And they, okay, sure. She said, we're your sisters. So there were opportunities. And I think, if my memory serves me correctly, there was one time when one of them wrote her a note saying, Dad's kind of on his last legs, would you like to meet him? And she decided not to. She decided not to open up that door. But I don't think, she's never told me that she regrets it. And she has never regretted reconnecting with her siblings until the moment that she did. The only thing that she's ever told me in her entire life that she's ever regretted was recently, and she said to me, I denied you your legacy. And I said, she said, I denied you your legacy. As a child, I denied you your legacy. And I said, well, that's okay, Mom, because now I've got it. So, don't worry. But this is Aaron Soffin, you guys. Amazing job.
Let's take another question. I do have a question for Aaron. Yeah, right here, sir.
Thank you. Very moving film. Wonderful. Thank you very much. So I'm a little confused about your aunts. Everyone was scattered. Yet your mom was the one who was really away from everyone else. How did they find each other? How did they find each other?
Sure. The question is, how did my aunts and uncle find each other even though they were scattered around Chicago? I mean, I think you remember letter writing. You remember rotary phones. That's what it was. And my Aunt Gertrude really was the nerve center of communication. So she just stayed in touch with everybody, and I think that...
How did she know what they were?
Well, they all knew where each other was.
Oh.
I mean, the Jewish Children's Bureau kept them in touch with each other as best they could. There was no home that would take 7 kids. There was no home that would take 6 kids. And I just don't think that hopefully would ever happen again today, to have a family I mean, by the way, our family is the only family of 7 Jewish siblings known to have survived together and emigrated together, such that their photograph, that hero shot that you see of them in front of New York Harbor, that hangs in the last gallery of the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum in Washington, D.C. And here's a fun fact for you. The museum opened in 1994. My Uncle Alphonse was living in Maryland, and he went to tour the museum. If you've been to the museum, you start at the top and you wind your way down to the bottom. And he got to the bottom, and he came face to face with a photograph of himself. So that's what began his journey back into his heritage.
Right.
Is your aunts and uncles' resilience as strong as it comes through in this film?
Are my aunts and uncles' resilience as strong as it comes through in this film? Joel, what do you think?
Yes.
They are superheroes. I mean, Ruth, what you see up there, that's Ruth. And that's just like a minimum of Ruth, okay? We don't have Ruth on this mortal plane anymore, but I know she's up there watching all of this happening. Each of them is resilient in their own they're all very different from each other. They really are as different as you see on the, up there they are in life, and participate in very different ways in their faith, in the conversations that we're all having today. Like, they're very strong people. Yeah.
I did want to jump in and ask Aaron a quick question, and then we'll get to your questions. Aaron, can you talk about, coming onto the project and working with Beth, and also just what is it like to work with a director who's, it's her family's story, and you're having to kind of honor that story, but you're also a stand-in for the audience. So can you talk about your creative journey on this film?
Yeah. To a certain extent, it's clearly Beth's story, but I think that Beth is also a stand-in for a second generation children of survivors. I am third generation children of survivors, and so I think that there's just part of the process was kind of processing that, helping her process that, me processing that, and thinking about the audience as us processing that, and then obviously people that are not in that line too. But I think that was kind of the first, the biggest part of the work to a certain extent. And one of the things that we worked on quite a bit was figuring out Beth's role in the film as a character. And she said earlier that she didn't feel like it was her story to tell. the obvious extension of that is she didn't feel like she needed to be in the film in the way that she is, and that was something we really worked through in this lens of if Beth is processing this, how she, as a person and as a character, helps the audience to process this. And so that was something that we spent a lot of time on. Yeah.
And what was your favorite scene to edit?
My favorite scene to edit. So there is a moment, maybe 15 minutes in, when we are looking into Alexander's time in one of those very early camps. And we come out of that to Beth discovering the documents of Alexander and having that very emotional moment. And I think one of the opportunities and challenges of documentary filmmaking is finding those things which didn't necessarily happen in the exact same moment, but are telling the same story and finding ways to put them together. And figuring out how those two things were juxtaposed was a delight, I would say, and kind of helping the audience to see Beth's journey and what that meaning of discovery is.
Let's go.
Were your mother and her siblings, were they adopted or taken in, they were all adopted by Jewish families, and did they practice their religion, or how did that go?
The question is, were my aunts and uncle also adopted into Jewish families, and what was their journey? Because you had to be sponsored to come to America, the Jewish Children's Bureau of Chicago came to be their sponsors. So they were all placed, including my mother, in Jewish foster homes. My mother's foster home was abusive, and she told my Aunt Ruth, and my Aunt Ruth got her out of it. And it was at that time that the social workers at the Jewish Children's Bureau decided that probably adoption was a better route for such a young child. My Aunt Judy was offered adoption, and she turned it down. She was 2 years older and was convinced that her father would be coming over forthwith. And of course, that took another 10 years. But they were each placed in a Jewish foster home, and then because of their ages, you age out pretty quickly at the age of 18. So I think Alphonse was in for 1 year. They each had very different experiences in their foster homes. And then after they aged out, they had very different experiences of the kinds of people they would marry and the kind of faiths that they decided to raise their families. So Alphonse in particular married a Catholic woman. They raised their children Presbyterian, and his dying wish was to be buried in a Jewish cemetery. So he became a Lubavitcher, as a matter of fact, in the last 12 years of his life. We won't even go down that road. But
That's another movie.
that's a completely different movie.
What is that, though? I mean,
It's a very orthodox sect of Judaism, and it's not even orthodox. I mean, you could probably explain it a little bit better than I can.
I mean, it's a ultra-Orthodox sect of Judaism. You might see them wearing black hats and black coats, dressing in a very old-school, traditional kind of shell garb.
Yes, yeah. Yeah.
Let's get a couple more.
So, the family reunion that happens in 1986 when your mother's seen them. So, have you had relationships with your aunts and your uncle since that?
Oh, definitely. The question is, since 1986 and they had that reunion, have I had relationships with my aunts and uncle? All of them in different degrees. I would say my most, what's the word? The relationships that came the most naturally and organically were with Alphonse and Gertrude. And I think part of this process was me getting to know Renee. It was me getting to know Ruth. And my Aunt Judy and I had a relationship because she was the one that when I had a baby, she would send a little gift and things like that. And so we had more of a letter writing relationship. And we still, Aunt Judy and I talk on the phone several times a year. Gertrude I probably call monthly, if not more. And so we lost Alphonse, we've lost Ruth, we've lost Renee. My Aunt Senta, she's the one I knew the least, but I will tell you that when we began filming, it was in July, and by the time I got to Chicago, we started on the East Coast. By the time we got to Chicago, I was ready to interview all of them, but Senta was in hospice. And I asked, may I come? No, it's really not a good idea. No problem. I said, well, can I leave the cameras at home and can I please come and say goodbye? And also was told, she needs to just be, I think with hospice today, you just never really know where somebody is in their process of dying. And so I just respected it and stayed away. And the next thing I knew, my cousin Jimmy handed me a check that Senta insisted that he write on her behalf to give to the film. So that check is actually those pieces of paper that you have. That was the beginning of my idea to create a foundation, which is the Weber Family Arts Foundation. And the mission of our foundation is to combat anti-Semitism and bigotry and hate of all kinds through the arts by telling stories of hope. And this film in particular is it's Joel's and my Tikkun Olam. When we turn a profit, all the money will go to the foundation. So if you feel so inclined, just know that your donations are all tax deductible, but they will go towards hopefully getting the film to educational institutions, houses of worship, museums, but also to give other artists seed money so they can actually contribute to the conversation.
Good time for one more. Yeah, go ahead.
When you were interviewing the teenagers in the park there, what was your feeling about their reactions to your questions?
The question is, when I was interviewing the children in the courtyard, what was my reaction to their responses to my question, would you hide me? That was a crazy, that was our first day of filming in Berlin. And as a matter of fact, I don't even think we planned on filming that day. We were really kind of location scouting, and we wound up shooting 12 locations that day. It was just like baptism by fire, especially for somebody who had never been on that side of the camera before. So I look at that scene, it's so funny, and I see this awkwardness, but it's not about the kids, it's about me being an interviewer. And the awkwardness is me being like, what am I doing? This is so great that we have these students in the courtyard where probably, my mom was too little to have been a teenager there, but her siblings could have been back there as teenagers. And I definitely, like when I discovered that they knew who Marlon Craft was, this is a fun little fact. Marlon Craft is a rapper here in the USA. He happens to be my best friend's son. So that was crazy. But then when Muhammad told us that he was a refugee, I just felt like, wow, okay, I am meant to be here, I'm meant to be making this film, and I'm meant to just sit here and listen. That's my only job, is to sit and listen.
What about the girl's reaction, which was, it upset me because she's young, she's from Germany, and she hesitated with her,
I actually loved her reaction, and the reason I loved her reaction is because I felt that it was so honest, and it wasn't virtue signaling, it wasn't pretending to know an answer, and the other young lady, you don't see her reaction because we had to cut it. I know, no, I'm like commiserating with you. Aaron had cut such a beautiful scene, and there's this beautiful reaction in silence of the other young lady. But when we had her sign her release, she just requested that there be no footage of her by herself. She only wanted footage with other people. So we had to cut what I thought was another really beautiful moment in that scene. So now you get, what, an Adidas shoe? I think that's where we have like a shoe with a, we had to do something.
Can I add something?
Yeah.
So to the notion of her response in particular, what I love so much in thinking about that moment is when it comes back later in the film when we're in Hindersdorf, in the nunnery, and she says, if you know, then you're posturing. You probably don't know. And if you think you don't know, there's a good chance you're thinking about the things you need to think about to be the person who steps up. And for me, the truth is that you can't know. You really can't know, because the situation then, there, in that moment, the situation now in many places around the world is just unimaginable unless that is your reality. And what you will do in that moment is something that you have to think about to be ready for, and, take that when it comes. So.
I guess a follow-up to that is, in the course of making the film, do you feel you got closer to answering that question about the Schmidts and why they did what they did?
I mean, I have my interpretation of why I think the Schmidts did what they did, and I'll never know if it's true or not. You saw that there's one photograph of Arthur Schmidt with the two young boys. What we don't tell you is that one of those boys died as a child. And Paula is his second wife, so I do believe that his children, or at least the one that was alive when he hid them, was living in Berlin with his first wife, with his mom. So I think that for Arthur Schmidt, the imminent danger of your own offspring to be in harm's way was a bit more of a distance. Obviously, that's just my inferral. But I don't know that I'm any closer to the answer to that question. I just know that I am indebted because I'm here talking to you. And I have no idea if I would ever have the courage to do what he did.
Well, Beth and Aaron, we're indebted to you for making this amazing film.